For our call this morning on Cuba. As you know, as most of you by now know, the Department of State informed the government of Cuba today that it was ordering the departure of 15 of its officials from its embassy in Washington, D.C. That decision was made due to Cuba's inability to protect our diplomats in Havana, as well as ensure equity in the impact of our respective operations. On September the 29th, the department ordered the departure of non-emergency personnel assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Havana, as well as all of their family members. Until the government of Cuba can ensure the safety of our diplomats in Cuba, our embassy will be reduced to emergency personnel to minimize the number of diplomats at risk of exposure to harm. The decisions do not signal a change of policy or a determination of responsibility for the attacks on U.S. government personnel in Cuba. Investigations into those attacks are still ongoing. Regarding the attacks, there are now 22 people who have been medically confirmed to have experienced health effects due to the attacks on diplomatic personnel in Havana. The Cuban government has told us that it will continue the investigation into the attacks, and we will continue to cooperate with them in this effort. We will also continue our own investigation into the attacks. As I've mentioned before, if those numbers do change in terms of the number of Americans who have been affected, we will certainly bring that to you as soon as we can confirm it. Thanks.
Can I go to Cuba for a second? So I'm still confused about this. On the call, the senior official said, and you have just said, that, quote, we will need full assurances from the Cuban government that these attacks will not continue before we can even contemplate sending people back or allowing them to have their people come back here, right? That is correct?
Yes.
Haven't the Cubans already given you their full assurances that these attacks won't happen? That they have nothing to do with them and that they do everything to protect their...
I think we have... Let me go back to the Vienna Conventions. And the Vienna Conventions calls for the host country, Cuba in this example, to ensure that our diplomats and our diplomatic community is safe. Cuba is not living up to that. We cannot continue to allow our personnel to serve in Cuba when they are very clearly in harm's way. We just raised that number, unfortunately, to 22 today. Our folks are in harm's way. Cuba has a responsibility to protect against that, and they are clearly unable to do so.
But, I mean, are you asking, what makes you think that they are able to offer assurances that will satisfy your concerns?
Well, if this kind of activity stopped, if we didn't have this happening to our community down there, then perhaps the situation would be very, very different.
Well, let me put it this way, recognizing that this kind of thing hasn't happened here systematically, I mean, is the U.S. government in a position to absolutely guarantee the safety and security of every single foreign diplomat on its soil?
Look, we do our very best. And
Right.
That's exactly why when we noticed that there was something going on and started to put those pieces together, Secretary Tillerson made the decision to bring our people home.
So the thing is, you don't believe the Cubans are able to?
Clearly they're not able to.
Or they don't
Clearly they are not able to, or they will not. I don't know which it is. That is not a State Department official position, but they are clearly not able, or they're clearly not able to make sure our people are safe, and that is exactly why we had to bring them home.
So is Cuba in violation of the Vienna Convention?
You know, I think that I would leave that up to the lawyers to make that final determination.
You
But I will just say that they have a responsibility to keep our people safe. And we say very, very often here, the safety and security of U.S. personnel, including U.S. citizens abroad, is our top priority.
But your conclusion now, as of now, is that they are in violation of the Vienna Convention.
Look, I think that would certainly be something that our lawyers would be looking at. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to delve into that area, but they do have a responsibility, and I'll just leave it at that. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, thanks. But a few questions of logic here. If you're making it clear by taking this action that Cuba can't guarantee the safety of diplomats, but the U.S. still has personnel there, doesn't that tell everybody that those people are still...
Our policy and our policy on Cuba has not changed. We have diplomatic relationships with Cuba. We recognize that at this time there is a need to keep a post open there with a skeleton crew handling emergency type issues down there. You know, frankly, our folks, our State Department personnel, want to serve in countries all around the world. We have many of them who are serving in very dangerous capacities, and they don't get enough credit for doing this incredible, amazing work on behalf of U.S. citizens. So we do still have folks down there, certainly. but that is considered the essential personnel, and everyone else we brought home.
Have certain actions been taken by either the U.S. or Cuba or both to change the situation, to make those diplomats now safer than they were, say, a couple of weeks ago?
The trouble with that is we don't know what is causing this. We don't know who or what is responsible. That has not changed. I'm not going to get into the details of the investigation. Frankly, I don't have the details of the investigation. That's something handled out of the FBI, although our diplomatic security is certainly very involved in that as well. But that is all ongoing, and we just don't have enough information yet.
Well, it sounds like you're saying no, that they're still living and working as they were. I mean, there hasn't been any special...
To my understanding, but I'm not going to get into the security posture of our people there. I mean, that is the number one issue, trying to do as much as we can to keep our people safe. There is still an ongoing investigation. We know, and we've talked about this, the most recent attack was in the month of August. So we need to keep probing and figuring out what on earth has been going on.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, without giving away details that would shed too much light on the security posture, based on what you know, have you been able to take any action for those diplomats that you feel makes them safer than they were before?
I think that's something that I'm just not going to get into, simply because we don't want to give up what exactly we may or may not be doing to help protect our people. Safety and security, top priority. This is not something that we wanted to do. We don't want to have to bring our American personnel home. Frankly, our American people want to serve down there. They believe in their mission there in Cuba. This is not a choice of theirs necessarily, although we certainly allowed some who wanted to come home. But we're effectively forced to bring people home because we could not ensure their safety and security.
So the ultimate goal of expelling these 15 Cubans is what? Is it, I mean, what's the goal there? What's the ultimate objective in having them leave?
Well, to reach an area where we have certainly been harmed in our ability to do our jobs down there, okay? And now Cuba, we have this, not reciprocity, but something of similar sorts, where they don't have the ability to conduct their operations just like we do. No, this is not a punishment. This is not a punishment. Cuba, we are not going to say, is responsible for these attacks. Let me be clear about that, okay? And I think we have. We have consistently said there is an investigation ongoing. The Cuban government knows that. We've made that clear to the Cuban government. We are not assigning any blame. We don't know who or what is causing this, but I'm going to say one last time, and I don't want to take any more questions on this issue, Cuba has a responsibility under the Vienna Convention to ensure the safety and security of our diplomats and our diplomatic families. And let me leave it at that. Hi.
On Iran.
Hold on, anything else on Cuba? Okay, Cuba?
Cuba.
Okay, hi.
Hey, Heather. You mentioned that the U.S. would consider restoring staffing levels both here for the Cuban government and in Cuba for the U.S. government if these attacks stopped. These are fairly intermittent. The last one happened a couple of months ago. Is there a time frame it would need to stop? Since we have so few details on exactly what's causing this, could this be a suspension that could be indefinite if it doesn't happen for 6 months or
I think you're going to know my answer to this. Hypothetical. So that's just a hypothetical. Look, I understand you have to ask that you want to know that. We just don't know yet. The investigation is ongoing. We won't know until we get further down the road to hopefully figuring out what has caused this, and then we can reassess. Okay? Anything else on Cuba? Okay. Okay.
Regarding the visas.
Regarding the visas?
Yes, the
for
visas.
Cuba?
Yeah,
Hi, ma'am. What's your name?
I'm from Radio Marti.
Okay,
Name
welcome.
is Carmen, thank you.
Hi, Carmen.
You have a reduced staff, and you have you have Cuban citizens who have applied for visas to the United States. You have two categories. You have the cultural exchange, who are people who want to come here and have, obviously, cultural exchange. How will they get their visas? But you also have family members who are trying to reunite with their families here in the United States. How do they apply? The State Department has been linking the possibility of people going online. There's hardly any internet connection in Cuba, much less that people would have computers to access the applications. How will this be handled?
Sure, and a legitimate question. Our limited staff down there is able to handle emergency assistance to U.S. citizens in Cuba. That has to be our priority, to be able to manage things for U.S. citizens there in Cuba. In terms of the visa processing, we've suspended that for now. Some of this is going to be, we'll have more information for you in the coming days, but the processing in Havana for non-immigrant visas, they are allowed, they may apply at another U.S. embassy in another country or another consulate overseas. And so that's the situation for now. Look, the reality is, this is not our preference. We didn't want to have to bring our folks home. They want to be there serving U.S. citizens and also the Cuban community and those who want to come here to the United States. But the unfortunate reality is we just can't take that risk with the safety of our Americans. Okay. Anything else Cuba related? Okay. Go ahead.
The United States has been unable itself to determine up to this point what is causing this. Why would are you saying the Cubans are able to do so? What if they're not able to do so? How could they not look upon these expulsions as punishment if they're not able to assess what's been going on either?
Well, look, our conversations with the Cuban government, I imagine, will be ongoing. We still have a diplomatic relationship, and we still have a presence there in Cuba. They have a very clear obligation to keep our folks safe. If the situation were reversed and we were here in the United States, I think you all would be asking me a whole lot of questions demanding that we protect the personnel. And why on earth, America, can't you figure out what's going on with this other diplomatic community hosted here in the United States? So let me just leave it at that. Okay, let's.
Do you know what your answer would be to those questions?
What do you think it would be?
This is a domestic issue, it's not a State Department issue,
All right,
so
well,
go ask somewhere else.
maybe that would be the case, but that's a different situation. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on from Cuba. Okay.
Cuba follow-up, just on the 15 people that
Yes.
you expelled. How did you come up with that number and the names that you gave?
So we gave the Cuban government, when our officials spoke with them this morning, we gave the Cuban government a list of people. Those people have, I believe it's 7 days to head home from today. They were picked on just I'm not going to get into how exactly these were all picked, but we provided those names and we expect that the Cuban government will fulfill that. Okay?
They're not directly tied to these attacks, are they? In any way?
These are people who were here.
I understand.
just
they
as-
were picked at
look,
random.
Saeed, let me be clear. We don't know who or what is responsible for these attacks, okay? This is the final Cuba question. We don't know who or what is responsible for these attacks. The people serving here in their embassy did what we believe some of the similar jobs as our folks down in the embassy in Cuba. We have a reduced ability to do our work in Cuba because of the attacks on our Americans, okay? They now will have a reduced ability to do their jobs as well. Okay. Yes.
After we had our briefing yesterday, or maybe even during it, the Cuban foreign minister delivered a lengthy. Well, let's back for a second. You in your briefing yesterday said that the U.S. holds Cuba responsible to protect diplomats on its soil under the Vienna Conventions.
Right.
Although the U.S. has not laid out any specific steps that you feel Cuba has, but has not taken to do that. Foreign Minister Rodriguez, in his appearance in Havana, laid out some very specific things that Cuba has asked for that would help it do exactly what you have asked them to do, namely put a stop to this, such as immediate notification when there's an attack so they can go look for whoever's done it, access to the victims and their doctors so they can figure out what the symptoms are, and technical data about what weapon might have been involved so they know what weapon to look for, and that none of those have really been given to them. So I'm wondering, if the U.S. is going to keep Cuba in the dark about the investigation, how would you expect them to solve it?
First and foremost, when we are engaged in an investigation, we as Americans need to keep a tight hold on a lot of information. We don't want that information to leak. You all know about leaks. That information could potentially leak to other parties or who are involved, who may or may not be involved, okay? So providing information on the investigation could tip off what I'll just call the bad guys, who are responsible for this. We don't know who or what is responsible. So one, we wouldn't want to tip off the bad guys to any information that we have on the investigation. Again, I'm not calling the Cubans, saying that about the Cubans in general, but we wouldn't want this type of information to leak. Secondly, the investigation is ongoing. The investigation has not yet been resolved, so there is limited information that we could provide at this point.
But how do you respond to their claim that you're asking them to solve this crime and prevent it while tying one hand behind
We
their
are not
back?
asking them to solve this crime. We are down there with our investigators who are looking into this as well. If the Cubans have information that they would like to provide us, we would certainly welcome it.
Who's leading the investigation? The State Department or other
Well,
agencies?
we've talked about this before. The FBI
Right.
is leading the investigation. We have our diplomatic security corps, and they're involved as well. Beyond that, I don't know. Okay? Anything else on Cuba? All right, let's move on.
Do you have any updates about Cuba's attack? And I think last week, maybe the Cuban embassies has just leave all of those officials, the diplomats that you asked them to do. So what's the next move that the U.S. government is thinking about?
I'm not going to get ahead of what the U.S. government may or may not do. We have an ongoing investigation that's being spearheaded out of the United States with our best investigators on that, so they continue to move ahead with that investigation. We still don't know who is responsible, and we still don't know what is responsible for the injuries of our American staff. Okay. Steve, you want to?
Just to follow up on Cuba. CBS News, of course, spoke with one of the victims in the attacks who claims the State Department handled this, quote, poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the majority of the victims are satisfied with the way the State Department has offered them initial care and has responded to this?
Yeah. Now, I was just speaking with one of our colleagues who served down there in Cuba and is recently back here in the United States. And I asked this person that very question. How do you feel that we responded? And I've asked numerous of my colleagues that very question. I mean, we all care deeply about how our folks are doing down there. And I asked the question, do you feel supported by us? Do you feel that we were quick enough to respond? And the answer I got back was yes. As soon as the State Department knew what was going on, as soon as the State Department started to figure out a pattern, because as you recall, we talked about this before, we didn't know what was, well, we still don't know what is affecting people, but it took a while to put this together because the symptoms were so different. But this person said to me, once we figured out a pattern, yes, the State Department was extremely responsive. This person said to me that I'll say they, so it's not a he or she, never felt the pressure to stay in Cuba, although they wanted to make it clear that they wanted to serve down there. These folks love what they're doing. They feel a real dedication to the mission, to our mission down there in Cuba, the activities that they're involved with on behalf of the U.S. government with local Cubans, and they were encouraged by the State Department to come forward. Please get tested if you feel like you've had some sort of symptoms or something. So I would say, to answer your question, yes. Perhaps there's an individual who doesn't agree with that, but by and large, our people feel supported by us.
And just quickly, there was a security message, obviously, that came out on Friday with specific warnings about 2 hotels there. Sources say these hotel attacks began as early as February. Why is this security message just coming out now?
I don't have the actual timeline in front of me that lays out when attacks took place at different locations. And I'm not even sure that is something that we're making public. But once we started to figure out what this was all about, and started to investigate and realized that we were not able to protect our people, that's when the Secretary made what some would say was a tough decision. I think if you ask the Secretary, he would say it was not a difficult decision. This is a man, we've talked about this here before, who starts the meetings out literally every day with, are our people safe? And our diplomatic security will go around the room and talk about where our people are in certain parts of the world and how are they doing? Are they safe? Has there been an attack somewhere? Are people sick? Was there a car accident? All of that. And so this is something that we've remained extremely focused on.
Are the diplomats that are left in Cuba for the U.S. government, are they safe?
I think the Secretary has been clear about this. We have people who serve in unsafe positions all around the world. You know the countries, but that's the job that some of these folks in the State Department do. People like to think of the State Department as a bunch of bureaucrats sitting here in Washington. No, that is not the case. We have a lot of people all around the world who are in unsafe positions, who are doing the good work of supporting others in other countries and advancing American foreign policy.
Can I, to that point,
Yeah.
there are many diplomats that had to leave Cuba that did not want to leave, and in fact, I believe wrote the department that they thought that, as you said, like they know the risks. There are plenty of diplomats around the world that have health risks, whether it's Zika virus or malaria or Ebola, and they felt that the way that they were, kind of pulled out, their kids had to leave school, that many of the diplomats did not want to leave. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, look, people, I would liken it to a police officer on the beat. Okay, are you a police officer who wants to sit behind the desk? Well, some do, but a lot of them want to be on the beat, just like you as, hold on, just as you as reporters. Do you want to sit behind a desk all day, or you want to be out reporting stories? Our diplomats, do they want to sit here in Washington all day, or do they want to be out in the field helping people? They want to be out in the field helping people. They believe firmly in our mission and the work that we're doing down there. However, when our secretary looks at the situation and says, we can't protect you because we don't know what is causing this and we don't know who is responsible, he has to make that decision to bring our folks home. So I understand that not everybody wanted to come home. Understand that. We gave people the option initially, if you want to come home under compassionate curtailment, you certainly can. But when he felt that he could not adequately protect our people, he made that decision.
Can you just clarify, the person that you spoke to was
Yes.
was a victim of the attack, or was just someone who came back under the order
Someone
of departure?
someone who served there and someone who was tested. And we
But
offered that testing to our
Someone
folks
who
down
is
there.
a confirmed victim?
No.
Oh, well, because you do understand that there might be a difference between what someone who was a confirmed victim felt about how the State Department responded and someone who was
What I can
and
say
who
is
was just
that
told to come home.
without having spoken to everybody,
Fair enough. I
as
just wanted
soon
to
as
make-
we started to identify a pattern, what was going on, and
Right.
the first time we all talked about this, what had happened to our folks down there, people had experienced different symptoms. And it took a while to figure out that all of these unusual symptoms had a common thread. And
I got
there
it.
was
I was
something going on.
I was just trying to figure out if this was a person who is in the same category as the person that he's talking about, who is a confirmed victim. This person is not.
Well, I think
Right.
I will stand behind what I said, that
I
the
just
vast
wanna-
majority of folks, we're on top of this. We're offering them the best medical care possible to get evaluated and assessed and reassessed, offering them those we had earlier, the option of coming back to the United States or going to a different post. I said to my colleague today, do you feel supported by us? Do our people there feel supported by us and that we have their backs here in Washington? And the answer I got back was yes. Okay, thanks everybody. We
Thank
gotta leave
you.
it there. Okay, Andrea, go right ahead.
But Matt's colleagues at AP have obtained an audio tape. We have not been able to independently authenticate it, but in any case, are there continuing health issues? Does the State Department, does the United States government believe that this is an acoustic weapon? There have been reports or suggestions of another cause. And General Kelly said that the government of Cuba could stop it. A view that I think you've already expressed here, that the government could stop it if they wanted to. But are we at the stage of accusing the government of Cuba of being complicit or of
Here's where
causing
we
it?
are, exactly where we are right now. An investigation is still underway. We don't know who or what is responsible for it. You labeled the attacks a certain way, and I'm just not going to label it that way because we still don't know exactly what the cause or what the source is. General Kelly, when he said we believe that they can stop the attacks, I think what he was referring to is, one, we have the Vienna Convention. And under the Vienna Convention, that government, the government of Cuba, has a responsibility to ensure the safety of our diplomatic staff. That didn't happen. But there's also another well-known fact, and that is that in a small country like Cuba, where the government is going to know a lot of things that take place within its borders, they may have more information than we are aware of right now. But I want to be clear, the investigation is still underway. We don't know what is causing it, and we don't know who is responsible for it.
And have you been able to authenticate anything regarding the audio that has been distributed by the
I saw
Associated
that.
Press?
I've not heard the tape. We cannot authenticate that tape in any way. But an investigation is aggressive, and it continues.
And is the investigation presumably into the cause of the medical problem, as well as who might have perpetrated it? Is there another government that might be involved?
We don't know. We don't know who or what is responsible for it.
Is there anyone beyond the numbers that you already gave us who have been affected by this?
The
Is it continuing?
the last numbers that I provided, I believe it was 22, still holds, but I want to be cautious on that and remind you all, and I say this every single time, we continue to investigate, we continue to monitor the health and the health status of our staff. People are still able to avail themselves to testing. We unfortunately cannot rule out that there may be additional people who have been affected. As soon, if that were to happen, if we have additional people, I will certainly bring it to you as soon as I can, but it would have to be medically confirmed. But right now, that number stands at 22.
Heather, has the position of the United States government changed since it made its most recent announcement on staffing in Cuba? I mean, General Kelly seemed to imply that, I mean, I know you're talking about the Havana Convention and protecting American diplomats there, but it seemed as if you were saying that Cuba has the ability, or its government has the ability to stop these attacks, not just protect Americans. Has something changed since the U.S. announcement?
Not to my awareness, no. Okay, anything else on Cuba? Cuba. Did you have Cuba? Okay.
That sound that the AP released, is that still a sound that diplomats who are there are hearing?
I would never confirm that sound. I have not heard it. I read an article printed out online. I've not heard anything. I can't confirm any kind of sounds that some allegedly take place.
Confirm that they're hearing anything still.
I cannot confirm that now.
We exist in a multimedia environment now, so you don't have to just print it out. You can go online
least
and
it wasn't
click.
in an old newspaper.
You can click on it and listen to it, if
All
you
right.
so choose.
Anything else on Cuba? Okay. Go ahead, Michelle.
Because Kelly today said that the U.S. believes Cuba can stop these attacks. So the State Department, I mean, is that the State Department's position as well?
There is no space in this administration on this issue of Cuba. We know for a fact that our diplomats were injured. We know for a fact that somebody or something was attempting to hurt our diplomats. The Secretary made the difficult decision to bring our people home, even though we have a small staff who still remain there. All of that is the case. This is something we take extremely seriously. The investigation is aggressive. It is underway. It has not stopped. We will continue to look for the source and for the party that is responsible for this, and that's all I'm going to have on that.
Okay, but you can't, so if now the U.S. government is saying, we believe Cuba has the ability to stop this, there must be some reason to believe
I think
that.
I addressed that already. Cuba has a responsibility under the Vienna Convention to protect our diplomatic staff. That has not changed. It is also a well-known fact that in a small country like Cuba, that has the type of regime and government it does, they tend to know things that are going on within its own borders. And I'll just leave it at that.
The president answered yesterday a question about whether or not he believes that Cuba is responsible for the attacks on U.S. personnel in the affirmative. And he said, it's a very unusual attack, as you know, but I do believe Cuba is responsible, yes. That runs counter to what you've told us so far, that the investigation is ongoing and that while you hold Cuba responsible for the safety of these diplomats, you don't hold them responsible for the attacks. Does the president know something?
We've been clear in saying that an investigation is ongoing. I think what the president was saying and also what his chief of staff, General Kelly, was saying last week is the same thing that we have been saying, in that Cuba is responsible for protecting our U.S. Embassy personnel, our diplomats who are serving down there under the Vienna Conventions. That has been very clear all along. They have that responsibility. That is what they are supposed to do. They have not ensured the protection and the safety and security of our personnel down there, and that position hasn't changed. That's where we stand.
But with all due respect, that's not what the president
Well,
said.
that's what the intent was. We've not changed our view on that. The administration has not changed its view on that. The investigation remains ongoing, but we've also been clear about this. And at the State Department, we tend to be, super cautious about some of the things we say. But to anyone who knows anything about the Cuban government and the past of the Cuban government, it's hard to imagine that certain things wouldn't be known that were taking place on that island right there, okay?
But the president, that the president's comments caused some confusion. I mean, otherwise, why did the department feel it necessary to send a cable to all the embassies and consulates around the world titled clarifying the Cuban stance after the comments were made?
We
and in
always-
which that cable says specifically that we have not assigned.
We always do send out cables that, that explain any kind of changes in U.S. policy, and my understanding that cable was anticipated. That was something that we had planned. No, that is something that we had planned for and working on a cable that would go out across the world to alert people to some of the health concerns and areas and symptoms that people were experiencing. Okay, guys, we got to leave it there. Thank you.
But that last
Yes.
thing that you said, and it's something that you said last Thursday for the first time, that, you know, it's a small island and there's no way that the regime would know. Are you now at least implicating that, you know, they're complicit somehow?
I am not saying that. An investigation is underway, but I will just highlight that people who know about the background of the Cuban government, it would be hard to imagine that folks wouldn't know exactly what would be going on within its own borders.
Like you're saying, you know, someone in Cuba, in the Cuban government.
Guys, I'm going to leave it at that.